Shabbat Shalom. This week I stand before you feeling a little defeated, heartbroken, angry. Of course, we had the vote on BDS, boycott, divest, and sanction on the University of Michigan campus by the campus student government. Truth is, at the end of the day, there's not a whole lot of immediate impact. That the campus student government of the University of Michigan recommends to the university to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel doesn't mean a whole lot. The university can choose not to listen to them, and by all accounts won't listen to them. And I know that, I don't know where we're at, but somewhere on the, approaching the governor's desk or something like that is a bill actually against BDS, to make it a state law against BDS. So in a very practical way, I would tell you that the vote means little. But in our hearts and in our minds, the vote is horribly unsettling. I'm heartbroken because, frankly, I expect better from my fellow Michigan Wolverines. I expect them to be smarter. I expect them to be more learned. I'm afraid because 30 years from now, someone who sits on a student government council at any university could very well become someone who sits in our government at any point in the legislative process or even the presidency itself. That scares me. That scares me that someone who could vote for BDS today might be someone with real power somewhere tomorrow. And I'm angry because the BDS movement, the supporters of BDS, have really pulled the wool over the eyes of so many people. Because at the end of the day, BDS is not about finding a peaceful solution to conflict in the Middle East. BDS, boycott, divest, and sanction, is about eliminating Israel. It's about wiping Israel off the map. Let's be honest. That's what BDS is about. That's what their goals are. The Palestinian leaders who founded the BDS movement are quite clear about it. But the followers seem to pull the wool over the eyes of others in order to try and confuse them and cloud them. And maybe I'm most angry because the supporters of BDS have somehow done a significant job of teaching, educating, explaining that anyone who is against racism, who is against sexism, who is against prejudice, ought also to be against Zionism. They've succeeded in teaching the world that anybody who really identifies as a social liberal can't be pro-Israel. And that's probably what makes me the angriest, because there's nothing farthest from the truth. Because what, of course, is the one country in the Middle East that does the most to support women's rights, that does the most to support gay and lesbians, that does the most to eliminate racism? It's Israel. Yet the supporters of BDS have succeeded in pulling the eyes over liberal Americans and especially liberal Jews in convincing them of this intersectionality, that if they're against racism and they're against sexism and they're against homophobia, that they ought to be against Zionism too. And I'm heartbroken and angry and a little scared too. Because at the end of the day, to me, BDS equals anti-Semitism. BDS equals anti-Semitism. We can spin it, we can cover it, we can hide it, but BDS equals anti-Semitism. So it was with this backdrop in mind that I came across our Torah reading this morning, Parashat Tol'dot. And usually I just focus on a pasuk or two, a couple of verses to really just explicate for my sermon. I'd like to ask for your help this morning. I want to do a little deeper Torah study with you this morning, because to me the lessons that seem to come out of our Torah, that repeat themselves generation after generation after generation, are just as relevant today as they are in any other year. And so in order to really understand our Torah portion this week in Parashat Tol'dot, I need to rewind a little bit and look at Parashat Vayera. In Genesis chapter 20, after what's called a sister-wife incident, and that's a conversation for another time, a strange motif that occurs 3 times in our Torah in Genesis of one of our patriarchs pretending that his wife is actually his sister. We won't go there this morning. You'll take my word for it. Nevertheless, you have our patriarch Avraham, who makes a brit, a covenant with Avimelech. Avimelech is the king of Gerar. Now, Gerar is a mid-sized town, if you will, southeast of Gaza and southwest of Hebron. All right, so we're in the Sheva, we're in the valley, somewhere in between Gaza and the Mediterranean Sea on one side, Hebron. Here's this kingdom of Gerar. Seems like a pretty good area. And after the sister-wife incident, Avimelech and Avraham strike a covenant, and Avimelech says to Avraham, "Here my land is before you. Settle wherever you please." And Avimelech promises to Abraham that his children and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren are allowed to live in the area of Gerar, unmolested, unbothered, for all time. They make a pretty good covenant. All right, so that is the backdrop to our Torah portion this morning. And if you'll turn with me, please, to Genesis chapter 26. I'm on page 150 in your Eitz Chaim Chumashim, page 150. We have once again a famine in the land of Israel. And here God tells Isaac to stay in Eretz Yisrael. And where is Isaac in Eretz Yisrael? He is in Gerar. He's in this kingdom where Avimelech is king. And it's been pretty good because Avimelech and Abraham had this covenant with each other. Yet again, Isaac, like his father, isn't it amazing how often we repeat our parents' footsteps? The older we get, the more we become our parents. How do you feel about that, Mom and Dad? And Isaac repeats the same sister-wife motif as his father Abraham did before. And if you see verse 12, let's go back up a little bit. Avimelech says, "What have you done to us? One of the people might have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." And here we are, verse 11. Avimelech then charged all the people of Gerar, saying, "Anyone who molests this man or his wife shall be put to death." Now that's pretty good in the history of the Jewish people. When any nation, when any sovereign power says anyone who bothers the Jewish people, I know I'm using my language a little bit anachronistically, but anyone who bothers the Jewish people is in trouble. Right? That is unique in the history of the Jewish people. But here we have it in the case of Isaac. Avimelech, who's the king of the land, says anyone who bothers Isaac and his family shall be put to death. Seems like it should be pretty good for Isaac and his family then. Seems like Avimelech is doing his part to uphold the covenant that he struck between Avimelech and Abraham. Verse 12. Isaac sowed in that land and reaped 100-fold that same year. The Lord blessed him, and the man grew richer and richer until he was very wealthy. The Hebrew is wonderful. You hear how often they repeat the word gadol. Vayigdal ha'ish vayelech haloch v'gadel ad ki gadal ma'od. Right? The Lord blessed him, and the man grew richer and richer until he was very wealthy. Isaac acquired flocks and herds and a large household. It's pretty good. So that the Philistines envied him. Now, what do we need to know about this? Of course, here we have a case of the Jewish people doing well, of succeeding, and what immediately happens? The non-Jews surrounding them become jealous. They become jealous of them. Right? And now we have to know, too, if we're looking back, the word Philistines. Philistines, by and large, were the people who lived along the sea coast, along the Mediterranean coast. They ultimately penetrated a little bit into the land, and over time, the Philistines became the arch enemy of the Israelites. The Philistines were such an enemy of the Israelites that when the Romans conquered the land of Israel some 2,000 years ago, and they renamed the land, in order to really stick it to the Jewish people, they renamed the land after their enemy, the Philistines, and they called it Palestine. The word Palestine and Palestinian comes from the word Philistines. Right? And it's the Romans' efforts to further undermine and embarrass and punish the Jewish people. So here we have a situation where the Philistines are jealous of our ancestors, they're jealous of Isaac and his family. And what do? They're not allowed to hurt Isaac, because after all, Abimelech the king made a ruling. So what do? The Philistines stopped up all the wells which Isaac's father's servants had dug in the days of his father Abraham, filling them with earth. Now, if you think about the wells that existed at this time, they were wells that collected water, more of a cistern, wells that collected water as the rivers in the wintertime rushed through. And so they often became filled with rocks and dirt and earth, and you had to really go through and clean out the water before drinking it. And so here the Philistines, they weren't allowed to touch Isaac and his family. They weren't allowed to injure him because of Abimelech's decree. And so what do? They decide to harass him. They decide to harass him, and they block up the wells. And so they have no fresh water to drink. And Abimelech then said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you have become far too big for us." What is Abimelech saying here? We're afraid of you. You become too rich, too successful, and we're afraid of you. What has Isaac done in order to justify this fear? Nothing. Absolutely nothing, other than be successful. Nevertheless, this is what Abimelech says after the Philistines stop up the wells so that Isaac and his family can't drink. So it says, Isaac departed from there and encamped in the Wadi of Gerar. It's sort of suburban Gerar, if you will, just outside the main part of the city, where he settled. Isaac dug anew the wells which had been dug in the days of his father Abraham, and which the Philistines had stopped up after Abraham's death. And he gave them the same names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants digging in the wadi found there a well of spring water, so this is now not a cistern that just collected rainwater. They actually were able to dig down and find fresh spring water that they could drink. The herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, "The water is ours." Now, in ancient times, they had a very formal way of looking at discovery and ownership. It was called finders, keepers, losers, weepers. And so here, in that Isaac's servants found this water, it belonged to Isaac and his family. But nevertheless, the people of suburban Gerar, right, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, "No, the water is ours." He, Isaac, named that well Esek, because they contended with him. Now, did Isaac fight back? Did Isaac protest? Did Isaac take to war? None of the above. And when they dug another well, that is Isaac's people, they, the suburban Gerarites, disputed over that one also. So he named it Sitnah, literally hostility or harassment. So these are his two wells, contention and harassment. So Isaac moved from there and dug yet another well, and this one they did not quarrel over it. So he called it Rehovot, saying, "Now at last the Lord has granted us ample space to increase in the land." From there Isaac went up to Beersheba. I'm on page 152. That night the Lord appeared to Isaac and said, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Fear not, for I am with you, and I'll bless you and increase your offspring for the sake of my servant Abraham." Because after all, God keeps the covenants he makes. So Isaac built an altar there and invoked the Lord by name. Isaac pitched his tent there, and his servants started digging a well. And now Abimelech, the one who kicked Isaac and his family out of Gerar, came to Isaac from Gerar, with Ahuzah his counselor and Phicol chief of his troops. Isaac said to them, "Why have you come to me, seeing that you've been hostile to me and have driven me away from you? No, what else can I do for you? Here you keep chasing me out of town. I left town. I'm gone. I'm leaving you alone. I got my own well. I'm not bothering anyone. Why are you coming back to me?" And they said, Abimelech and his crew, "We now see plainly that the Lord has been with you. And we thought, let there be a sworn treaty between our two parties, between you and us. Let us make a pact with you that you will not do us harm, just as we have not molested you, but have always dealt kindly with you and sent you away in peace." This, my friends, is what we call revisionist history. This is revisionist history, right? He, Abimelech, is now afraid of Isaac, And so he says, let's make a deal, let's make a peace treaty between you and me so that you won't war against me because, we people of Gerar, we've always been so kind to you. We suggested maybe you would want to leave in peace, and then you went. Now, we just read a page ago that they harassed him and chased him out of town. They denied him the opportunity for fresh water. They denied him the opportunity to thrive so that he had to leave. Nevertheless, they're engaging in some revisionist history. Could you imagine a Middle East leader engaging in revisionist history? Doesn't seem possible. From now on, be you blessed of the Lord, Avimelech says to Isaac. Then he made for them a feast. Isaac made for them a feast, and they ate and drank. Why? Because at the end of the day, all Isaac wants to do is live in peace. All Isaac wants to do is raise his family. All Isaac wants to do is live out his life in comfort with those who are around him and not have to worry about relations with his neighbors. All Isaac wants to do is live in peace. So he accepts this revisionist history. He accepts what they have to say. He accepts this new covenant, this new treaty. And he makes for them a feast and says, you know what? Let's put the past behind us and let's be friends. Could you imagine a Jewish leader saying, okay, we'll put the past behind us and let's just accept what is now to try to make peace? That's what the Jews do generation after generation. Early in the morning, they exchanged oaths. Isaac then bade them farewell, and they departed from him in peace. That same day, Isaac's servants came and told him about the well they had dug and said to him, we've found water. He named it Sheva. Therefore, the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. The oath that occurred at the well. It's the same story over and over again. Here, Isaac, the Jewish people, are just trying to live out their days in peace with their families surrounded by those they love. And time and again, they're harassed by their neighbors because of jealousy, because of envy, because of unfounded fear. And so time and again, the non-Jewish community surrounding the Jews harasses us, ultimately forces us to leave. And then when we finally find a home again and become successful, what do? They try to make peace with us then, as long as it works to their advantage. The moment they no longer see it working to their advantage, they take a covenant and they throw it out the window. Jewish history repeats itself over and over again. So here we have the people of BDS and the people of Israel. And we have our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land who, if you ask them, almost to a one would say, you know what, simply, I just want to live out my life in peace. I almost don't care who my neighbors are, so long as they leave me alone. So long as they let me live my life in peace and freedom. And yet you have the evil of BDS, pulling the wool over the eyes of so many Americans, trying to rewrite history and trying to force the Jews out once again. Now, if you'll turn back with me one page, I found an interesting commentary. How many wells were there? Really, there seem to have been 3 wells. 3 wells of spring water that Isaac discovered. The first one was named Esek, the second one was named Sitna, I'm on page 151. The third one was called Rehovot. Ramban, Nachmanides, about 800 years ago, he wrote a commentary. And he also pointed to the repetition of history over and over again, and the Ramban came to teach that Esek, that first well that was stopped up, that first well, that spring water well that the suburban Gerarites came to claim as their own. He said that was the first temple. It belonged to the Israelites and then was taken away. And that second well that was disputed over, that Isaac gave up on again, that was Sitna. And Ramban says that was the second temple that also belonged to the Jews and was taken away. And then the third well that ultimately became the well that they could benefit from and no one seemed to contend over, the one named Rehovot. That will be the third temple, the third holy temple, when the Jewish people will finally know true and lasting peace in their land and the opportunity to serve God forever. Friends, the story is the same over and over again. I don't have any good answers other than that we have to work harder. We failed. Maybe we didn't see it. Maybe we didn't step forward to support our friends at the University of Michigan well enough. But time and again, we become complacent. And so history and the anti-Semites who dominate our history are allowed to rise again. So my question to you this Shabbat is, once Shabbos is over, what are you going to do? What are you going to do to make a difference? What are you going to do to combat the forces of anti-Semitism? What are you going to do to stand up and educate about Israel and her right to exist in peace and freedom? What are you going to do? Now, I want to leave you with something very telling. And I came across it in my learning for this morning. And here is a quotation that says, "Our position is based upon the belief that it is through cooperation based on mutual respect, rather than through boycotts or discrimination, that our common goals can be achieved." Now, who wrote that sentence? It was the leaders of Al-Quds University in cooperation with Hebrew University. The most learned of the Palestinians recognize that BDS will not achieve true and lasting peace, but will only lead to further war. And so this joint statement between Al-Quds University and Hebrew University continues, "Bridging political gulfs rather than widening them further apart between nations and individuals thus becomes an educational duty as well as a functional necessity, requiring exchange and dialogue rather than confrontation and antagonism. Our disaffection with and condemnation of acts of academic boycotts and discrimination against scholars and institutions is predicated on the principles of academic freedom, human rights, and equality between nations and among individuals. The Palestinian people who simply want to live their life in peace and freedom, they know that their best friends are the Israelis and not the Palestinian leadership. And when we think back to what was the one thing that allowed Isaac and his family to live in peace, it was when they became strong enough that others began to fear them. Because just as Golda Meir, I think it was, who said, when all of the Arabs put down their weapons, there'll be peace. But if all of the Jews put down their weapons, there'd be no more Israel. This Shabbat and this coming week, let us work for the strength of the Jewish people. Let us work for the strength of the state of Israel. And while we're at it, let us work for the strength of the University of Michigan. Go Blue. Adonai oz le'amo yitain, Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. May God bless the Jewish people in Israel with strength. And may God thus bless us all with peace. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will. And we say together,